Welcome to the Copeland Coaching Podcast, where it's all about turning your job search into a slam dunk. Your host is Angela Copeland.
Welcome to the Copeland Coaching Podcast. I'm your host, Angela Copeland. On the phone with me today, I have Peter Shankman in New York. The New York Times has called Peter a rock star who knows everything about social media and then some. He's a 5-time best-selling author, entrepreneur, and keynote speaker. He's recognized worldwide for radically new ways of thinking about the customer experience, social media, PR, marketing, advertising, and ADHD. Peter, thank you for joining me today.
Oh, pleasure's mine. Nice to be here.
Well, I first saw you speak about ADHD and business at Indeed Interactive, and then I started following your podcast, Faster Than Normal. And in your podcast, you mention that you think of ADHD as a gift rather than a curse, which I think is a unique or a really positive way to look at it. I'm curious for you, when did you kind of come to that conclusion that it could be something positive?
You know, I always try to figure out how come I could, how come I could do things like start and sell companies, but couldn't remember to take out the garbage for, days at a time. And I realized that, my brain is just not like everyone else's. I do things faster. I'm faster. I'm more, some might say, out there in terms of how I do things, a little crazy. And over time, I realized that was actually a tremendous benefit. Having a faster brain is a great thing as long as you know how to drive the faster brain. If you don't know how to drive it, if you're used to driving a Honda Accord and then someone gives you a Ferrari, and you're used to slamming your foot on the accelerator on the Honda Accord to get it up to merging speed, and then you slam your foot down on the front, you're gonna crash into a tree. And so you have to know how to drive that faster brain. Once you put those processes into place to be able to drive that faster brain correctly, there's nothing you can't do. You're unlimited.
That makes a lot of sense. I think, from my observation, it seems like sometimes people who have ADHD or ADD, sometimes they're able to see connections and things that maybe other people don't see right away. Do you find that to be true for yourself?
No question about it. And not only do we see them, but we're able to act on them much quicker. And the reason for that, a lot of times, is we don't care whether we're right or wrong. We have a hypothesis. We want to test it out. We're going to go do that. And it's sort of, a lot of people stop and they think, oh, well, what if this doesn't work? And we're like, let's see what happens. And that can create some spectacular successes and some spectacular failures. I've had, I've had some beautiful disasters too.
Mm-hmm. It seems like one thing is when you grow up with ADHD, you're so used to running into things I think they're sometimes more challenging. And I suspect that when you become an adult, it makes you less fearful of failing because you've seen it before.
I'm a big fan of failure. I think that, I don't want to hire anyone who hasn't failed. Failure means that you're trying stuff. If you haven't failed, what are you doing with your life?
Right. It makes sense. Well, so when did you start sharing your ADHD diagnosis with other people? Like, when did you start talking openly about it?
About maybe 3 or 4 years ago. I always knew I was ADHD. I always admitted that, and I never hid that for anyone. But I started offering information probably about 3 or 4 years ago, and then I launched the podcast about 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago, and the book came out October of 2017. So it'll be 2 years this coming October. The book came out, and the book has really sort of changed the game. People are amazed. I get emails literally every day from people who have read the book, whose lives have changed, who feel so much more inspired. It's really nice.
Oh, that's great. I didn't realize it was so recent. Like, when you started talking about it more openly, how did people respond to you? People in your life that knew you that maybe weren't like family members, for example?
Well, it was more of a thing that, there's always going to be people that question why are you doing this? What's wrong with you? Why would you want to share? The thing that I don't really care. I learned a long time ago that if you don't have haters, you're not doing enough to change the status quo.
Right.
And so I enjoy when people look up and they go, what's wrong with him? Why is he, who would do that? Well, I would. And the way I am, whether it's for better or for worse, I am who I am. Papa, I am what I am, right? And I am who I am. And I have been very successful being me. I think I'd be terrible being someone else. I have no idea how to be someone else, but I've done very well by being me. I've had a very successful career by being me. I started and sold 3 companies. You know, one for 7 figures by being me, and that is, in I guess I look at that as a wonderful way to be. I like being different. I like being sort of non-traditional, and I couldn't imagine being anyway else.
I like that. I mean, it's very sort of freeing to just put it all out there. Well, I talk with job seekers every day who are looking for a job, and many of them who struggle with ADHD. And especially for the folks who are struggling with ADHD, there's very often times where they come into the job search with a lot of worry and a lot of anxiety because they've had trouble in the past at a job. Like they've failed, something has gone wrong, and it's just a really, really stressful process to look for a new job. And I'm curious, kind of based on your experience, like what tips would you have for us as we're looking for a job if we're facing this kind of fear of failure?
Well, first of all, ask yourself what's the worst possible thing that can happen. If I remember a friend of mine was really, had like 4 interviews, and then the last interview was with the person who would have been her direct report, and she came in saying, "Oh, I totally blew the interview. The person was so horrible and mean and this and that." And I said, "So you probably didn't get the job?" And she goes, "No." I said, "Well, you dodged a bullet there." She goes, "What are you talking about?" I'm like, "Was you really going to work for someone like that? Think about that." So I think, first of all, stop worrying. The universe does tend to unfold the way it should, which means that you're going to get the job that is the right job for you when the time is right. Now, I know that's not much comfort when you've been out of work for 6 months and you're starting to get bored or starting to get a little angry that you can't find something. But all you can do, you can't control other people's actions. All you can do is control your reactions to other people's actions. And what does that mean? That means that you can stand up tall and you can walk in and you can not get angry and you have this ability to control everything about you, and as such to control the entire mindset about you. And a lot of times that leaks over into the mindset of other people. Tons of studies have been done that when you go in and you walk in exuding confidence into a meeting or something like that, people believe that you know more. You might not know anything. I mean, God, I've given keynotes where I pretty much don't know anything. But people believe that I do. I walk in there with a level of confidence. What's the quote from the Bible? Have faith, and faith shall be given to you. Or, to put it another way, fake it till you make it.
No, it's a good point. I think the thing that's hard to remember sometimes is it feels like that the failure that we've experienced in the past might repeat itself in the future.
Yep.
But
and the only time failure can really repeat itself in the future is if you haven't learned anything from your mistakes. As long as you're learning something from your mistake, you're not going to have that same failure. And you can do, if you want. What's that really annoying quote that people put on Facebook pages all the time? If you want something you've never had before, you have to do something you've never done before. There's like a picture of a turtle or something. But the fact of the matter is that it's kind of true, right? Think about what you did for the last interview. Try to do it differently this time, right? So if you woke up at 7 for the last interview and it was at 9 and you were rushed out the door, try getting up at 5. Try going to bed early, getting up at 5, spending 40 minutes exercising, which will give you the dopamine and serotonin and adrenaline you need in your brain to be able to process better, right? And that dopamine is also responsible for how you smile and how you walk into a room and how you stand tall, all that stuff. So try to front load yourself on dopamine as much as you can before you go into that meeting. You'll be an entirely different person.
That makes a lot of sense. I think you're totally right. And I know from experience, it's no fun when you're running late for an interview. It can set...
The greatest thing I've ever done in my life is understand at an early age that 15 minutes early is on time and on time is late.
That's a very good point. That's a very, very good point. Well, so I'm curious, as you have talked with people who have ADHD, and whether it's, through sort of your book, your podcast, or, working, just managing others at the companies that you've started, have you noticed that there's maybe certain types of jobs that people who have ADHD tend to do better at?
We tend to do better at jobs we enjoy doing. I can't say that there are certain people with ADHD who do X better than Y. I know that we are very creative. We tend to be hunters as opposed to gatherers. We enjoy running after something, getting that kill, whatever it is. Seth Godin was on the podcast. He talked all about the concept that farmers used to, up until 1,000 years ago, that didn't exist, or for 11,000 years ago. Prior to that, we were chasing our food and killing it and eating when we did. And so we were used to that excitement, right? And we became very good at being hunters. Then, farming, agriculture appeared. And now we don't have to wait until we've, killed the saber-toothed tiger or whatever. And that tends to slow people down. We're not okay with that sometimes. So, look for something that you enjoy doing. I'm not suggesting that you go out and be a hunter and start finding saber-toothed tigers, but I suggest that you find a job that fits into what you enjoy. You're going to be doing it 8-10 hours a day. Do something that will generate that dopamine for you automatically every day because you're excited to do it.
Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense.
Instead of saying what kind of job you want, say that I don't know what you love, but find the job doing something that you enjoy doing.
That makes a lot of sense. I've noticed with folks when they really like something, it's almost like they can become hyper-focused on that particular
Right, that's
topic.
what we do. ADHD, that is exactly what we do. My last 3 books have been written entirely on airplanes, not because, most of the time, because I'm always on a plane, but Zombie Loyalist I had 2 weeks left on my contract. I hadn't written word one. I'd done all my homework. I hadn't written anything. And the publisher calls like, "Hey, get ready to see that book." I'm like, "Oh yeah, no problem." And hung up the phone and called United Airlines and booked a business class ticket to Tokyo, leaving the next morning. I had no earthly reason to be in Tokyo. I wrote chapters 1 through 5 in the flight to Tokyo, landed, exited the plane, went through immigration, took a breath of fresh air, went back into the airport, went back through immigration, went to the lounge, took a shower, had a cup of coffee, got back on the same plane, same seat, 2 hours after I landed, and wrote chapters 6 through 10 on the flight home. I landed 31 hours after I took off, back in New York with a book. And everyone thought I was crazy, but I'm like, you just spent $5,000, $6,000 to go nowhere. I'm like, nope, spent $6,000 to be uninterrupted for 31 hours and write a book.
That is a great, great story. What makes it easier for you to write on an airplane? Is it it's the uninterrupted part?
100% uninterrupted focus. No child, my 6-year-old isn't there. My cat isn't there. I can't go outside. They have Wi-Fi, but it's United Airlines that usually doesn't work. So it's like there's nothing that can bother me. There's nothing that can get in my way and prevent me from just going to town and going to work.
That is so interesting. Wow.
It's worth every penny. I do it for every book. It's worth every penny.
Wow.
I flew to Hong Kong 4 weeks ago for work and wrote about 15 blog posts on the way out and about 25 on the way back. And yeah, it's great.
That's incredible. That's a great tip. Well, so we were talking earlier just a little bit about, dodging a bullet when you go into a company that's maybe not where you should be. And in your book, Nice Companies Finish First, you actually have a chapter where you talk about the warning signs. You talk about 9 warning signs of a hopeless jerk. And I'm curious, if we're looking for a new job, what should we be on the lookout with regards to spotting a bad boss?
I always take any employee, I do this as a boss, but I take anyone who's going to work for me out to lunch and I see how they interact with the waitstaff. And how they treat the waitstaff determines whether or not I hire them, if all else is being equal, right? So what you want to look for a boss that is a decent human being. You can be a decent human being, and I've seen people who are decent human beings be bad bosses, but I've seen bad human beings be bad bosses a lot more, right? So be aware of the type of person your potential boss could be. Is he or she a yeller? Does he or she give credit where it's due or try to hog the spotlight? Does he or she have your back? Right? Are they an egomaniac? Look for these things. Look at the interpersonal reactions they have with other people in the company. Figure out how those things work and take a look. I also wrote a blog post about one of the number one things you can tell about whether or not you want to work in a company. Go into the bathroom and see what kind of toilet paper they have. I have done this this sort of unofficial, unscientific study that companies who have like sandpaper, like one ply, horrible toilet paper, are usually not good companies to work for. It something as personal as, what wipes your butt is how the company determines that generally speaks as a good indication of the company itself, right? If they're skimping, and you get sandpaper ass, that's a good sign right there that they're probably not, that employee comfort and employee value is not really that important to them.
I like that. I've never heard that before.
Yep.
It's a good example. Well, so, I know I'm guilty myself of taking jobs before when the boss turned out not to be great, and sometimes where I knew the boss was not great ahead of time, but I just thought the job itself was just so perfect. I couldn't pass it up. Like, in your view, I guess, and it to me looking back, it seems so obvious, but why is it so important to work for a good boss, or why does that matter?
Well, you want a boss who's going to help you grow as well. That's what people don't realize is that you grow in a job primarily at the boss's discretion, right? You can grow. If they want you to grow, you can grow ridiculously fast. If they want you to sit there and wallow, you can do that too. So you want to find a boss that treats you as someone who they want to see succeed as well.
I think that's true. It's completely true. I've seen situations where people who are very talented were sort of pushed down, and other situations where someone who was, so the boss really helped them move up quickly. And
you also, agreed with that. You also want a boss who is not going to have a problem if you make mistakes. Again, that's how you learn. My whole logic was, if I tell you what to do or if you try to do something and you get it wrong, I will tell you how to do it right, and we can try it again. If you get it wrong the second time because you haven't listened to me, then we're going to have words. But I will never get in trouble. I will never get you in trouble for having done something wrong just because you tried something different.
It's really good. I think that's a really good approach. And it brings the stress level down for the employee quite a bit.
No question about it.
Yeah. And then you can be more creative. You can do better work.
Exactly. Everyone wants to be able to work in a sandbox where if they screw up, it's not going to hurt.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so I'm curious, if we are out interviewing for jobs, in your mind, does it make sense ever to share that we have ADHD with a future employer?
I'm a believer that we do. I believe it does make a lot of sense. The fact that studies that I've done show that 35% of the workforce and 35% of customers are going to be neuroatypical in the next 10 years. That's ADD, ADHD, autism spectrum, any form of mental health issue. Now, if you're a company, you know already that the most creative people in the world are usually the ones with the mental health issues, whether it's, again, ADHD, autism, whatever. So if I own a company, I want to make sure that my company is unbelievably warm and receptive to people with mental health challenges and brain differences, because I will have the most creative employees in the world, right? And so I'm teaching companies, I'm working with big companies, trying to get them to understand that diversity also has to include mental health.
I like that.
And so I've had some great, I've done some great work for some big corporate brands who need to who understand that they need to learn this. And so it's not just about skin color. It's not just about sexual orientation. It's also about mental health.
That makes a lot of sense. I've often heard that people who are neurotypical in some way tend to be underemployed.
Yep.
And I've got to think it has to do with a lack of awareness
No
at
question.
companies. Yeah. Because I don't think, everybody wants to work and be a contributor, I'm curious, like, if we were to disclose that we have ADHD, who would we tell and when would we tell them and how would we say it?
I've heard good things about telling your boss. When you get the job, telling your boss, say, hey, look, just FYI, I've diagnosed ADHD. What does that mean? It means I'm a lot more creative than most of your employees, but some of the things I do might be a little weird. There might be days when I don't take my headphones off all day. I come in at 4 a.m. and I work until noon. And it's not that I'm leaving early. In fact, I was here early. I'm probably going to get double the output of work that you're used to from any employee. I'm leaving at noon because I don't people very well today, right? Mm-hmm. I can't people very well today. And so I'm going to come in super, super early, get so much work done before anyone's here. And then once the place starts to fill up, I'm going to bail around lunch because that that is, I can do my best work sometimes without other people around.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I've had to explain to bosses that no, I like a person. I like you. You're my boss. I like you. You're a person. I like a person. I hate people.
Right. That makes sense. So it sounds like you would suggest that we wait until after we've gotten the job offer as opposed to during the interview.
Yeah. I don't think there's no reason why to bring it up during the interview.
Okay. That makes sense. Well, what about, so one thing that you talk about on your podcast quite a bit are different coping strategies that you use. And I'm curious, what coping strategies, if we're struggling at work with ADHD, what things might we consider if we've kind of missed?
Treadmill desk or a bike desk are two of the best possible things I could ever recommend in the world to change your life. Having a treadmill desk, just being able to walk as you work, is like the greatest thing ever. So, you know, you're building that dopamine as you're sitting there doing things that would otherwise take it away. You know, exercise every morning before work is always good. Eating healthy, avoid the carbs, eat more proteins, some good fats, things that keep you awake, things that give you more energy. You know, do things that are in line with how your brain works and what your brain needs, right? So I've simplified my entire life. I have two uniforms. When I'm speaking, and you saw me when I spoke, it was a button-down shirt, jacket, and jeans. And when I'm in the office or traveling on a plane, it's t-shirt and jeans, and that's it. My suits, my vests, all that stuff, those are in you know, a different closet in a different room. Because if I look every day, oh my God, what should I wear today? I remember that vest. Laura gave me that vest. I wonder how she's doing. I should look her up. It's 3 hours later. I'm naked in the living room on Facebook. I haven't left the house. So you want to make sure that you're covering all your bases and eliminating as much choice as possible so that you can focus and think about the things that really matter.
I totally agree. I totally agree. And I think, you know, I've noticed sometimes people tend to be either really focused on doing their best work and they're incredibly good performers, or sometimes they come in and I work with them and they're kind of a mess. And it seems like sometimes when you have ADHD, there's not a lot of middle ground. It seems like something you really have to attend to if you want to do your best work.
Yep, no question about it.
Yeah. Well, so another thing as it comes to work is, you know, I have noticed this lately, and it's honestly becoming my pet peeve. A lot of offices, and I thought this was a fad, but it doesn't seem to be. A lot of offices are switching to an open office concept. And I don't mean cubicles. I mean like fully open office, feels like you're in a Starbucks with all your coworkers.
As long as you have the ability to shut out the rest of the world, you can never underestimate the value. You know, people say that you should always spend a lot of money on, you know, like good shoes and a good laptop, the best you can afford. I would also throw in spend as much money as you possibly can on the best pair of noise canceling headphones you can afford. You know, so I've used noise canceling headphones along with, like, I have a pair of glasses that connects to my phone via Bluetooth, and I actually can see my screen in my head instead of having to look at it sometimes. Because if I'm surrounded by people, I'm going to look at them. I don't want to do that.
That's interesting. I mean, so as I've kind of been talking with different HR folks about this issue and saying, you know, have you ever heard of accommodations where you give someone an office, or maybe you let them work from home or whatever, a few days a week? And I've talked to some people at some very progressive companies, and they have never heard about this. And so it makes me think people who have ADHD aren't talking about it, or are not talking about what they need. I mean,
it is difficult. You know, there's still a stigma attached to anything mental health. And that's one of the reasons I have this podcast. You know, one of the reasons I'm thrilled to be on yours. I'm trying to break that stigma.
Yeah. Yeah. It's tough. I mean, one of the folks I talked to is a HR person at a really big company that's very progressive. And they said, well, why doesn't the person just take an easier job? I mean, if it's too hard for them to do it in an open office, why don't they just take an easier job?
That's not how it works.
Right.
You know, what you shouldn't have to change your, you know, why don't they give you what you need? You know, in some states it's required by law that they do.
Right.
You know, and the thing is that we're not asking for much, right? If I ask for a quiet place to work or a place where I won't get distracted, I'm going to produce better work for you. Wouldn't you want that?
Exactly. Right. Yeah. I actually had 3 different people say, well, I just don't know if it's considered a reasonable accommodation for someone to get like this quiet space. Like,
Well, they don't necessarily need their own office. I mean, I've seen situations where they just where they're able to go off the floor. A friend of mine works in a lab. She's a scientist, and her lab mates are loud as hell. And so she actually goes into an empty conference room when she needs to get into that sort of deep zone of focus.
yeah, that's an interesting point. That's an interesting point. Well, so I'm curious if, say, we're interviewing and this particular issue comes up for us, like we're going to job interviews and we get there for the in-person and we're like, oh, good God, it's this giant open floor again. I mean, what do you recommend? Like, say we're trying to not disclose in the interview, like how do we handle this?
You can ask the question, where do people take meetings? Right? Where do they go for quiet calls? Just ask the questions.
That's a good question. That is a good question. I think also it's good to maybe ask, what is the culture around working from home? Because I think some
definitely.
folks, and some
You
people,
just want to make sure you're explaining why, as opposed to working from home is not, what's the culture of working from home could sound to a potential employer like, I don't want to come into the office at all.
that makes a lot of sense. So do you say, I have ADHD, I need to work from home? Or do you say, I want to get my best work done?
Only my best work done. Sometimes I tend to do better work when I'm by myself or when I'm alone. What's the policy on that?
That's good. That's a good suggestion. Well, so you have worked both, you've worked in corporate situations and also been self-employed. And I'm curious, when you think about folks who have ADHD, which do you think tends to work better? And are there sort of pros and cons of each?
I can't answer that. It depends on what works for you. What I can say for me is that I had one job in my life. It was America Online. They let us work any way we wanted. I didn't realize that wasn't the norm. And my second job that I had that I lasted for 3 weeks in was like, oh my God, I have to have their 8 a.m., 8:30 a.m. meetings, and I have to punch in, and I get 45 minutes for lunch. And what is this, Russia? That didn't work. That didn't work for me. And so I was, that's when I realized, okay, I need to go out on my own. But there are some people who crave the structure that an office desk job gives them, and that's totally fine. Whatever works for you.
That makes sense. When did you first find out that you had ADHD?
Not until my mid-30s. Growing up, I was diagnosed with sit down, you're disrupting the class disease.
Okay. That makes sense. Wow. So how did you, until before your mid-30s, like how were you coping with it? Were you finding ways on your own?
Basically, yeah. Everything that I do now is what I was doing. I just wasn't aware of why I was doing it.
That makes sense. Well, so what, let's say that we've recently been diagnosed or we suspect maybe we have ADHD or maybe we know, and we're trying to manage it. We're really struggling. Like, are there certain resources that you would recommend that if we need to reach out, what things are out there?
There's so many resources out there and so much stuff is available. Obviously the first thing, talk to a doctor. Talk to a doctor who can either get you the right people to talk to, who can help you find someone to get you diagnosed. This is not anything to be ashamed of. And there are a lot of ways to get help out there to be able to be your best person.
So I'm curious, like, I live in Memphis, Tennessee, and there's not much awareness about ADHD here in the South that I've seen. When you talk with people about it, they think of it like something really negative. Do you think there's any regional component? Like, are people more aware in certain parts of the country, or?
It's very possible. But again, I would go with the concept of why do you care? Right? You know what you have, you know how you work best. Screw what they think.
That's a good point. That's a very
If I spent all day worrying about what people think every day, I'd never get shit done. Anything.
That makes a lot of sense. Well, I'm curious, like, so where should we go to learn more about you and your work? Where's the best place?
You can find my ADHD work at fasterthannormal.com. You can find me at shankman.com. I'm at Peter Shankman on all of the socials, including Peloton.
Awesome. Well, Peter, thank you so much for joining me. This has been great.
The pleasure was mine. Happy to do it.
And thanks everyone for listening. If you've enjoyed the episode today, please don't forget to help me out. Go to Apple Podcasts and subscribe to the show. The more subscribers we have, the easier it is for other people to find the show.
Thank you for listening to the Copeland Coaching Podcast today with your host, Angela Copeland. Tune in next time to get more great tips on turning your job search into a slam dunk.